Welcome to Piper's Paraphrases. I'm Professor Pipes, and today I'm discussing chapters 16 through 21 of Harper Lee's classic, To Kill a Mockingbird. These chapters cover the trial of Tom Robinson, and there's a lot to cover, so I'd better hurry up and get to it. In chapter 16, residents from all over travel to Macomb to watch the trial. Jem points out several notable figures, including the town drunk, Dolphus Raymond, a wealthy white man who married a black woman. When the kids decide to go into town to watch the trial, Scout notices that the white residents seem happy. Gross. While the African-American community gathered seems sad and somber, which is much more appropriate when a man's life is on the line. The kids sneak into the courthouse, but there are no seats left downstairs, so Reverend Sykes offers them seats in the segregated balcony. In Chapter 17, we hear the testimony of Heck Tate, the sheriff, and Bob Ewell, the father of the supposed victim. First, Heck says that he was called to the Ewell house and found Mayella, who appeared very beaten and bruised, and she told him that Tom Robinson raped her. He reveals that Mayella was mostly beaten on her right side, and she had evidence that she had been choked all around her neck. Spoiler alert, this is going to be super important later. Bob Ewell was, honestly, really unlikable on the stand. He kept making inappropriate jokes. Dude, it's your daughter's rape case. Not the time. He claims that he heard yelling when he was heading home, and when he got to the window, he saw Tom Robinson raping Mayella. But then, Tom ran away. He says that he never called a doctor because there was no need to. Right. Atticus has Bob write his name, and it turns out that he's left-handed. Oh, you didn't get why that's important? No worries, I got you. But for this, I'll need some help from my good friend, Pikachu. You see, a right-handed person would mostly hit someone on their left, but a left-handed person would mostly hit someone on their right, much like Mayella's injuries. Thanks, Pikachu. In Chapter 18, we hear the testimony of Mayella Ewell. She claims that she offered Tom a nickel to chop up a dresser for her, but he attacked and raped her when he got inside. When Atticus cross-examines her, though, we learn a lot of important information about her life. She is one of 8 kids, and she's the only one who tries to keep clean. She has almost no education and no friends at all. In fact, when Atticus calls her Miss and Ma'am, she thinks he's making fun of her. So sad. It's also clear that her father is a drunk who beats her and her siblings. Atticus then asks her about the supposed attack, asking why she didn't fight him off, where her siblings were, and how Tom was able to hold her down and choke her and beat her and rape her, all with only one working hand. Yep, that's right. Tom's left arm is short and useless from a childhood injury, so he can only use his right hand. Is that important, Cooper? Why, yes. Yes, it is. Mayella yells that the jurors are cowards and that she won't answer any more questions. And then she bursts into tears. In Chapter 19, we finally hear from Tom Robinson himself. And he is so honest and so nice, even though the prosecutor is extremely rude and racist and keeps calling him boy. Even Tom's boss, Link Dees, interrupts court to say how great he is. Tom says that Mayella invited him inside to fix a door, but when he got inside, he realized that there was no broken door, and Mayella said that she sent her siblings away. Before he went to leave, she asked if he could get something off the top of a wardrobe, and when he was standing on a chair to do so, she grabbed him. He was startled and jumped down, and Mayella grabbed him around the waist and tried to kiss him. Just then, Bob Ewell appeared at the window, called Mayella a whore, and threatened to kill her. Tom was able to get out of her grasp and run away. When the prosecutor starts to belittle Tom, Dill gets really upset, so he and Scout leave. Whoa, with so much court stuff, I almost forgot about the kids. It's a good thing I don't have any. In Chapter 20, Scout and Dill meet Dolphus Raymond, who offers Dill a drink. Uh-oh. But as it turns out, he's not a drunk. It was only Coca-Cola in his bottle, not booze. He just pretends to be drunk because people can't understand why else he would want to marry a black woman. He explains that he revealed his secret because he could tell that Dill understood that what was going on was completely wrong. Dill and Scout head back inside just in time to hear Atticus's closing statement. And man, is it something. He talks about the facts of the case, such as the fact that Mayella never even saw a doctor who could confirm that she had been raped, the location of her injuries, and the fact that Tom physically could not have caused them. He also implies that Bob Ewell beat his daughter because she dared to break a social code in their world. She kissed a black man. Then he talks about the fact that, of all places, a courtroom is where all people should be treated equally, where all men should get a square deal. He closes by telling the jury not to be persuaded by their emotions, and instead to do their duty and send Tom home. And just as he finishes, Calpurnia enters the courtroom. In Chapter 21, we find out why Calpurnia is there. She's looking for the kids. Uh-oh again. Mr. Underwood, the newspaper editor, points them out and they're sent home. After supper, though, they head back to wait for the verdict and end up waiting for several hours. But it ends with the verdict that anyone with a brain or a conscience knows is wrong. Guilty. As Atticus leaves the courtroom, defeated, the African Americans in the balcony stand to show their respect for him. Lots of new folks in these chapters, so let's start with a brief look at several of them. First of all, Bob Ewell is a real piece of poop. Excuse my language. But he is. He spends all his money on alcohol and not only doesn't care about his children's education or well-being, but outright beats them and sexually assaults his daughter. I really can't with him. Mayella Ewell is clearly stuck between a rock and a hard place. It seems likely that the reason she's willing to testify against Tom is because she's scared of what her father will do to her otherwise. That doesn't justify it, of course, but it does make her actions more understandable. She's also symbolized by the geraniums she has planted, trying to blossom in a literal dump. And it's broken her. As Atticus says, I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witness of the state, but my pity does not extend so far as to her putting a man's life at stake, which she has done. Dolphus Raymond is an interesting guy. He's kind of like 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. On the one hand, his wife is black. Okay, not technically his wife, because that was literally illegal back then. Man, we were horrible. So he isn't racist, and he also talks to the kids about treating everyone fairly. However, he's also not willing to just stand up to people and say that he loves his wife. So he's also really not advancing the cause. Tom Robinson deserves so much more than he got, and so much more time than I have to give him. He's honest about his past trouble, patient with the racist and condescending attitude of the prosecutor, kind and compassionate towards Mayella, and just plain scared for his life. There's really nothing bad that you can say about him. Unfortunately, there's not much at all we can say about him, since we don't really get to know him as a person, which actually brings me to the last person I want to talk about, Atticus. Now, Atticus is undoubtedly a good moral man. He stands up for Tom at a time when many, if not most people, would not. He's a role model who can encourage people to fight for what they believe in. All of this is great. And as a person, so is he. However, as a character, he is problematic when viewed through a literary lens. Essentially, he is considered by many to be a white savior. A white savior narrative is one in which a white character saves a non-white character from something bad. That sounds great and all, since historically, oftentimes, white individuals had more power to bring about change. So, using that power to help others is great. However, in a white savior narrative, there are two main problems. First, the praise of the savior comes at the expense of the ones he saves. Usually, their stories are hardly told. They aren't really fleshed out as characters or people. And they're portrayed as weak and unable to stand up for themselves. All of which is problematic, and frankly, kind of defeating for a reader who may identify more with the person of color rather than the white savior. Second, a white savior narrative is also inherently self-serving. Now, I wouldn't say that Atticus is self-serving. He seems genuinely selfless. However, the story itself is self-serving, making the author and any readers who identify with the white savior characters feel comfortable and good, without actually having to do the active work of helping others. If you like Atticus and think he's great, that's enough. But really, it's not. You have to practice what you preach. Let's start off our themes by talking about compassion. We of course see this in the character of Atticus, who cares for Tom and fights for him compassionately. However, we see it even more in Tom Robinson. He explains that he would help Mayella out with little chores every single day because he knew she needed the help, showing just how kind he is. In fact, his compassion and sympathy even got him in trouble with the case's audience and the prosecutor, who were highly offended when Tom, a black man, said he felt sorry for Mayella, a white woman. Yeah, how dare he feel bad for a sad, lonely, abused woman? What a jerk. Thinking for yourself is shown through the characters of Atticus and Dolphus Raymond. Dolphus mentions that the rest of the town could never understand that I live like I do because that's the way I want to live, showing that he's willing to live the way he wants rather than the way society thinks he should. However, like I said before, while he does think for himself, he doesn't really encourage others to do the same, unless he sees a bit of himself in them, like he does with Dill. Dolphus also mentions that Atticus is not a run-of-the-mill man, and we can see this for ourselves. Atticus clearly fights for what he believes in, despite the fact that he knows other people disagree with him, and he encourages the jury to do the same. But of course, they don't. Which brings us to our next theme. The absolute most obvious theme in these chapters is social inequality, specifically racism, and sadly we see it in so many ways. It starts out in chapter 16, when Jem talks about Dolphus Raymond's children, who are not accepted because they have a white father and a black mother. Jem even says that it doesn't matter how a person looks, because around here, once you have a drop of Negro blood, that makes you all black. Tom's treatment during the case also demonstrates racism, as he is called the N-word by Bob and Mayella, and called boy by the prosecutor, Mr. Gilmer. And then, obviously and tragically, the testimony and the entire case itself are also evidence of racism. I mean, need I say more? It's wildly clear that Tom Robinson is innocent. He physically could not have choked Mayella or beaten her on her right side. There is no evidence of rape since she never saw a doctor, and there's no evidence beyond the highly questionable testimonies of Mayella and Bob. And yet, he's found guilty. All of this shows that racism alone was the deciding factor. As Atticus says, this case is as simple as black and white. And yet the jury decided to go along with the assumption, the evil assumption, that all Negroes lie, that all Negroes are basically immoral beings, that all Negro men are not to be trusted, and they found him guilty. Sadly, sometimes it seems like times haven't changed. Before I finish up, I'd like to leave you with some food for thought questions to consider. First, what types of rhetoric does Atticus use in his closing statement, and what makes them effective? Second, what are your thoughts on the complicated character of Dolphus Raymond? Third, during the trial, Scout, Jem, and Dill sit in the segregated balcony. What does this show about them as characters, and about their upbringing? Fourth, do you think Harper Lee does enough to flesh out Tom Robinson as a character? Why or why not? And finally, given the plot up until this point, was the trial's verdict surprising or predictable? Why? Thanks for watching this episode of Piper's Paraphrases, but sorry it was such a sad one. Well, go forth, read a bunch, and be good people.